Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm Michelle Cobb, Executive Director of the Podcast Academy, and we are very pleased to be here with Durin Gleaves from Adobe, talking to us about all the great things you can do with Adobe and podcasting. I'd just like to remind everybody that we are having a number of upcoming events. June 29th will be our membership meeting. We encourage you to attend and walk through the past year. Can you believe it's been a year that we've been doing this now? And we will be raffling off 3 tickets to Podcast Movement. So do come live and have a chance to win a ticket to that event. On July 7th, we'll be talking to James Cridlin from Pod News, all about what's happening in podcasting all over the world. And July 9th, we'll be having yet another Lunch and Learn with the State of Women Podcast Network. Anyone here today who has questions, I please ask you to put them into the Q&A box, not the chat box, so that we can be sure and see them. Couple other reminders. We'll be starting a new mentorship program coming up later this summer. That'll be mentorship work groups, so you'll have a chance to network. So look for that. There'll be surveys seeing if you want to be a mentor or a mentee. We will be working on a new internship program that'll launch in fall 2021. So lots of exciting things happening. And then, of course, since we have hit our year anniversary, some of you will be getting renewal notices for your membership. If you have any questions, you can send an email to info@thepodcastacademy.com, and we will do our best to assist you. All right, just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Durin will actually be taking them as we go along, so don't feel like you have to wait till the end to put in your question. All right, I'm going to turn things over and go behind the curtain here.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon or morning, everybody, or evening. I don't know where everybody's coming from, but I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much. And congratulations. I mean, 2020 was I think the year of podcast. I think I checked this morning, and you still can't get most brand name microphones on YouTube right now. So we all broke the market. It's fantastic. And it's been great for me over here working on Adobe Audition. Just the amount of podcasts, the amount of people who've been reaching out, sharing their stories of the last year, sharing their difficulties, getting, really working remotely, getting all these remote guests and recordings coordinated. It's really given us a lot of great feedback. But what we're here today to talk about is an Adobe Audition Masterclass for podcasters. So I'm going to assume that you have a little bit of, that you have a pretty strong foundation in common audio editing techniques across different applications, the things that are the same, whether you're using Audition or Audacity or any of the other ones. And I'm going to focus on really being able to maximize your efficiency, take advantage of the things that kind of make Audition unique and really stand out from a lot of the other applications. So I won't waste too much more time talking about myself and why I'm here. I'm just going to jump right into it. So I will switch to this, and Michelle will jump in if you have any questions about what I'm talking about. The first thing I wanted to show, so this is a recording from a Rodecaster Pro. If you you can certainly use anything. I love this device. I'm not being paid to shill it for anybody, but it works really well for capturing, and I'm going to use it for some of what I'm showing off today, because I know it's pretty popular and there's ways to utilize it inside Audition beyond just a quick and easy interface for recording. But really I wanted to start today with showing you how to customize a workspace in Audition, because if we go up to our default workspaces with all the stuff that we have in there when you first launch the application, a lot of it isn't really necessarily useful for podcasters or for people who are doing different types of work. So what I wanted to show you was how to customize the workspace, how to find things if you close a panel, because I know that comes up a lot, especially from people who are coming from maybe some mobile apps or simpler apps where there's that customization isn't available. And how Adobe apps work is they're panel based. So you'll have blocks, and you can see a block is highlighted. In my case, I have it green, so it stands out a little bit more. But it gets highlighted as you're clicking around, and you can see that in different panel blocks, there's these, you can have different panel views, different things that are happening. And, certainly people do discover you can come in and resize just by grabbing between them, but you can also kind of reorder things the way that you like to work, or just having the panels that you want on screen. So if you're working primarily in Audition's waveform view, and I'll talk about the difference between waveform and multitrack and why you might want to work in one or the other or both. But if you're working in waveform view primarily, a lot of these panels aren't really going to be for you. So like the essential sound panel, we can just click here and say close the panel and get rid of it altogether. Now, if sometime in the future you're like, oh, I want to find that again, everything is under that Windows menu. So you can click on the window menu here at the top, click essential sound, and it will pop up right back where it was before. Maybe you like that essential sound panel, but you don't really want it there. You want it accessible, but not on screen all the time. Well, the way that
we're not, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing your screen. We're just
You're not seeing my screen. Well, that doesn't make any, that makes far less sense. Let's try this again.
There we go.
Okay. Well, I'll just start all over from the beginning. No, I'm teasing. I apologize for that. So let me show you here. So if I grab the panel tab here where it says essential sound and I drag it out, you can see as I'm starting to move the cursor around, these weird purple boxes are showing up. And these are what we call drop zones for moving and embedding and docking these panels. So based on where my cursor is, the drop zone changes to these different shapes. And really that's just giving me an idea of where that position is going to be, that panel is going to be placed when I release the mouse. So in this case, you can see at the top of this panel group here, this panel box, it says media browser, effects rack, markers, and properties. And it's a full square across the top. So this is sort of like a tabbed folder approach at the top of a panel group. So if I was to let go of this panel right here, it's going to become one of those tabbed panel views. If I was to grab it and drag it down around, you can see there's a couple different hot drop zones in this panel group that I can lay it out. And this is just telling me more about where it's going to be placed in relation to the other panels in this group. So if I was to lay it here at the top, this top wedge, it goes above those panels in that group. If I was to bring it down and put it to the right, it's going to be aligned to the right. So you can start to really lay out really custom views on the things that you want to use and the way that you like to work, being able to switch between them more quickly, and just showing the things that are most relevant to you at the time. We can go into more detail on that, or you can certainly explore it a bit, because if you ever mess things up, let's say I really make a mess of things, I bring this down here and this comes over here. Let's actually put it right here. So right here, so it's really in the way. Very weird. I can always come back either to the window menu or these little drop downs over here, but I can just come back, choose Workspace, and say reset to saved layout. And it will always get me back to where I was before. So, you can really get in there, try things out. If you don't like it, reset it back. If you do find that you like it and you want to be able to jump to it more quickly, you can always come back here and save changes to a new workspace. And you can call that, my podcasting workspace, Durin's favorite workspace, whatever you want to call that. And you can really easily switch between those. Workspace customization is really, really nice for clearing out the clutter, and especially if you're working on multiple systems. Your desktop with a great big curved monitor, you might want everything on screen at once. But if you're working on a laptop, you might just want the essentials. You might just want the editor, maybe a files panel and an effects rack, and just work with that. Now, I said I was going to talk about the difference between waveform and multitrack. So waveform is what we call a destructive editor. It's when you open a WAV file, an audio file that has one or more audio channels of recorded data. And when you make changes, when you apply effects or you cut out a snippet or clean up some background noise, and you hit File Save or Control S or Command S, you're overwriting that file on disk. To some people, especially those coming from maybe a video background where everything is done what's non-destructively, that can be a terrifying proposition. But for a lot of folks who are doing real quick recordings, just want to say, let's make a new audio file, and I'm just going to record myself saying, hey, welcome to Podcast Academy. Oh, I'm not using the right microphone here because I am on Zoom. So let's just do that. Try this again. Hey, welcome today. This is Durin Gleaves for Podcast Academy Masterclass. You just want to grab something really quick. There's no need to set up a project. You can just do it here in Waveform view. Then be able to just come in, pull out the bit at the end, the little place where my mouse clicked, maybe put a fade, and then you're done. You know, it's not a whole project. It's just making a quick asset. Whereas multitrack is what we call a non-destructive editing environment. And this is where you create or take existing files, what we'll call assets, and rearrange them, place them around in time. So you're able to start, bringing different parts of an interview, the host and the guest, rearranging that, maybe even cutting up in what we call frankenbiting words, so that if somebody had a mush mouth, or, like me, where I'll stumble across some words sometimes, you might be able to take a word from later in the recording or something that was close, and without changing the meaning of what I was trying to express, at least make me sound more intelligent or more articulate than I usually am. The other thing about multitrack is, as we place effects and automation and changes, whenever I hit file save, we're not overwriting any of those wave files on disk. We're not changing any of those recorded files. We're only changing a project that references and talks about those files. So if I was to bring in, let's say I was to record a little bit of my microphone here, and I was to record something on track 1. And likewise, I wanted to record something on track 2. Do the same thing down here and record something else here. So we can pretend this is an interview or something like that. Now I can start to move things around, adjust my pacing a little bit, do things like, cut out an or an ah without changing the sync, without losing the synchronization between different elements. And again, this isn't changing the wave file on disk. If I was to double click on this, that or that ah is still there. It just doesn't show up in that multi-track environment. Now, this isn't just related to audio files, but this is also everything else about the session file that I want to be able to modify. So in the case of metadata, I may want to start with talking about, this is my podcast. Podcast Academy, Masterclass. Artist is, we'll call me the artist for today. And whatever else I might want to talk about, this is 2021. And then what's nice about this is this metadata is saved with the session file. So when I come back, if I want to add more, or I want to duplicate this and start with this configuration as a new session, I have this metadata, or I don't have to re-enter it all again. And when I create those mixdowns that are going to be my final MP3s for distribution, that metadata gets embedded into those MP3s. So it's not something I have to enter by hand each time. Now, something else I'll show you here is that we have, I have a pretty complex session set up here. You can see there's 4 microphones, USB input, TRRS, which is the iPhone connection, and cell phone connection, wired connection, as well as Bluetooth and soundboard. Now, I configured this multi-track to match the Rodecaster device here. So, this has the 4 inputs. It's got the USB, telephone, Bluetooth, and then the soundboard for triggering music and sound effects. And let me show you why I've set this up. So what I did was to emulate the way that the Rodecaster works, or you can do this for any device. I just happened to do this for this device. And let me actually close this session and reopen it, because I want to show you what I did, and I want to reset all my settings here. So one moment, I'm not going to be recording anything else, but I'm going to choose the Rodecaster again as my input device. And the reason for that is the Rodecaster has 16 audio channels. 14 of those are inputs from the device, and then 2 of the channels it creates are the mix of everything mixed together and coming out the speaker. So when I open this session file again, you can see that I've already set up every single track is set up with a default input. So the track that's mic 1 is set up with mic 1, track that's set 2 is set for mic 2. Likewise, the USB input is set to the stereo USB input. So I've configured this up front once with the different mono and stereo channel assignments. I'll bring this out so you can see it a little bit more. And setting it up once, yeah, you can take a little bit of time, to really get this set up and take advantage of the hardware. But once I've done it once, I don't want to have to do it again. I don't have to do it every time I'm going to start a new episode of a podcast. So what I can actually come up here and do is choose File, Export, Session as Template. Now this will take everything that's in this session. So that, for right now, that includes the track assignments, the track layouts, but it may also have, there may be, I won't play this for licensing purposes, but if somehow I was Michael Jackson's people were not as litigious as they are, and I had licensed to use Billie Jean as my intro music for my podcast, I could drop that on a track, maybe my USB track or a music track, and have that as my default music track for every episode I want to create based on this template. I'm creating both the track assignments, the layout, as well as the content. So if I always start with the same intro music, or you have some audio branding that you have at the beginning or the end, or at every time at 5 minutes you have a big sweep or something like that come through, you can lay that stuff out, that common elements that are going to be used in every one of your episodes. Let me delete that before I accidentally play it. You can build that into the session template, and then when you're ready, you can export that session as a template, and we'll call this Podcast Academy templates episode 10. Yeah, template's fine, and click OK. And now every time I create a new multi-track session, maybe it's time for episode 2, I can just choose, rather than building it from scratch, I can come into the template dropdown and choose my Podcast Academy template. And you see it uses the same settings as I had it before. I click OK, and it will create that new multi-track session. All the assignments, all the effects, all the clips, whatever I've built in up front will always be there by default. So it's a really easy way to take the time to set things up right once, and then after that, you not have to think about it again. As long as your equipment or your layout, your configuration doesn't change, it will continue to work just fine. I can actually go ahead and share that session file with Podcast Academy members after the fact. I'll share some contact information, or maybe we can reach out and get you just a session file that you can use to create your own session template if you're using this device, or to use it as a guide if you're creating your own templates in the future. Now, why would I want to create a template? Well, we started off with this massive WAV file here. This is from the Rodecaster Pro, and it really records every single channel. So as I mentioned, there's 14 audio channels here. So 1 and 2, these first top two channels up at the top here, those are the mix of everything together. So if I was to be playing it out through speakers, or I was just using the Rodecaster to record everything, and I wanted to I wasn't going to do any work in a DAW like Audition, I could just export channels 1 and 2. And that's my MP3. That's what I would upload to my hosts. But then you can see it breaks down every other input and every other fader on the device. So channel 3 here is the, let's just do this. Channel 3 is the microphone 1, channel 4 is microphone 2, et cetera, et cetera. And if I was to try and drag these in to a multi-track session, well, I bring it in and it makes a 14 channel clip on a track. That's not really that useful. I mean, yeah, I can, kind of come in and cut and do some automation, but everything's all on one channel. I don't have that separation. Now I can twirl open any of those files and see all of those channels there. But to bring them in, I would have to either select them one at a time, or, whatever channels I wanted to bring in. And unfortunately, the Rodecaster doesn't really label. It just gives us 1, 2, 3, 10, 14. It doesn't really say this is mic 1, this is mic 2, this is the soundboard, but it's a very consistent layout based on the fader controls. So the easiest way for me to do this is just to grab this, drag it in, but I can use shortcut keys on the keyboard. And let me zoom in here a little bit more so you can see what's going to happen. As I'm dragging it in and I'm placing it on a track, I can hold down on the Mac, it's Option, or Windows, it's Alt, to separate the different channels of that file to the different tracks. And that's a very quick way to break it out as different clips. And that gives me full ability to edit each of those channels of that file as individual clips in my multi-track session. But you can see I wanted that original mix as a stereo clip on that first track, but it's breaking them out into 2 mono tracks because it doesn't really know that the first channels 1 and 2 are that mix, that master mix from the Rodecaster. So I can additionally hold down Command or Control on Windows, and it will honor the channel, or the track channelization, the track assignments I've made in Audition. So when I built this session template, I made that first track a stereo track. The 4 microphone input tracks I made mono, and then the remaining tracks were all stereo. That's how the Rodecaster works, and that's how its internal layout is. So when I bring these in, if I just hold down Control and Command, or Alt and Control on, Command Option or Alt Control on Windows, it will honor the channelization of those tracks. And I let go, and there we go. That's it. There's my host. There's my guest. There's my sound effects that I was playing on the soundboard, the intro music, some of the horns and sad trombone sounds. And now I can start editing, and I can start to edit individually while keeping everything in sync. So in this case, you can see there was only the first 2 guests, and I didn't connect to the USB or the iPhone connections or Bluetooth. So I can actually quickly just kind of come in here, delete those clips, and even shrink those tracks or even hide those tracks if I don't need them, because for this episode, I didn't have any of that extra content. So I click the little icon here, that'll keep those tracks locked and minimized. And now I can kind of come in here and, make small deletions like this if I want to get rid of some of the space, edit some of this down. But we also can take advantage of newer features in Audition to clean that up, and I'll cover those in a little bit, just a minute. I just want to cover a little bit more about this, because once this is set up, and I'm probably making it sound very confusing, but it's really nice. Once it's set up, you never really have to think about setting and configuring up these sessions again. Again, I'll show you tracks panel here. If those tracks that I had no content on, especially USB, Bluetooth, it might be nice to have them around, but I don't need to hear them. I don't need to see them. So we can use the tracks panel to just hide those tracks. They'll still be audible if there's audio on there, but it can help kind of clean up the layout and the view in this multi-track environment without having to get too fussy about moving things around. So I'll close that again. Again, that can show up anytime just by selecting it under the Windows menu, or it could become part of your personal workspace, and you can lay it out how you like it. Now, something that has come up quite a bit, and it was a new feature we just recently released in Audition, was the ability to strip silence from these long multi-track recordings. You can see, let me minimize this, and I'll just make these 2 tracks bigger. So this is the host recording, this is the guest. You can see there's a lot of space, a lot of empty space here between phrases or questions. And historically, if I wanted to get rid of some of that, not only to make my timeline look a little cleaner, but maybe the guest had a lot of background noise and I just don't want their background noise interfering while I'm speaking, or just reducing it so it's only minimized to when they're speaking, I would have to come in with the razor tool, click here and here, click here, click here, click here, and it's not hard. This is a pretty short file, so it's pretty quick, but it's time consuming, especially if it's a longer interview. And it's prone to error. It's prone to fatigue. If you're doing, 4 tracks that are in, a 90-minute interview, there's a lot of clicking. So what we did was we brought this feature that we had in waveform view, but we brought it into multitrack. So if I bring up the diagnostics panel, you can see we have a couple options here. One of them is delete silence. And if I click this, you'll see we have a couple of presets, and one of them is clean up podcast interview. Now, these are defaults. These settings are the defaults. They work pretty well in most situations, but your mileage may vary based on your recording environment, or maybe, if it was captured over Zoom, and there's a lot of crunchiness or some background noise. So you can always come in here and choose this Find Levels button, which will analyze your content and find the specific volume levels that are most appropriate for your particular recordings. But if you just want to try it out, the preset's just fine. You can find that under settings. Once I'm happy, I can click scan. It will scan the selected clips. And then I have a couple of options. I can split the silence, which will just do the razor cuts and then leave everything that it thinks is silence selected. Or I can do strip silence, which will delete it. But I'm going to hold off here because we can see that some of this silence is not really silence. And I'm going to go ahead and move. Now that it's selected, I can just kind of click and drag it all straight down to some empty tracks. And then I can kind of zoom in here and see what it found. So you can see this clip, this clip, this clip, and this clip. There's a little bit of noise. There's a little bit of signal there. And it doesn't look long enough. I can see why it triggered, because what we've done is we've defined silence as anything that lasts more than about 5,000 milliseconds. This is probably significantly shorter than a half second. So we can kind of listen and determine if we want to keep. That wasn't really needed. This one seems a little longer. What is this? Let's find out. It's kind of I'm not sure if that's coming across. But what's nice about this is it lets me kind of review what bits of sound maybe it was going to strip and delete, and it lets me decide, do I really want to get rid of that? If not, I can certainly come back here and drag it out myself and restore it, or bring that clip back up if I really wanted that. If that's an and I want to make sure that it's clear in the podcast that I'm acknowledging the guest and agreeing with them, I can go ahead and restore those. Or once I'm satisfied, I can just delete them and move on. And now I have separate clips for everything. I can move them around. I haven't changed anything. So if I do need to extend this a little bit, I can just extend it right up here on the clip. I can add some fades. If I need to bring this part over here and this part back, and I just want to retime some of these questions, I can do all of that. And I didn't have to go through and do those razor cuts and really spend a lot of time just kind of doing busy work. There are some other cases. So if you're unfamiliar with busing, or sometimes called auxes or auxiliary sends, what buses are a way to have a virtual audio track that lets you take the output from several real audio tracks and route them all into one pretend track, and then do things on that track that affects the audio coming in from all the other ones. So in this case, I have, and I'm going to bring back all my tracks here really quick so that you can see what's going on. Boom. Okay. So in this session, I have, the 4 audio tracks, the 4 microphone tracks, and then I have USB, stereo, Bluetooth, soundboard, maybe things that are sound effects or guests or other elements. But really, I want to focus on being able to manipulate the 4 guests that are participating in the podcast. That's really the most important aspect of what I'm doing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bus track. I'll just go to multi-track, tracks, and add a stereo bus track in this case. And right now, nothing's going to happen. There's nothing going to it. So if I was to hit play, you're not going to see any levels indicators on that bus track. Nothing's happening there. But on each of these audio tracks, I can send them out to the bus. By default, they all go up through the main mix, and anything that goes to the main mix is rendered down when I say I want to make a mix down when I'm ready to export my podcast. But in this case, I'm going to send them to the bus first. I'm going to just do that for each of the microphone tracks. And let me show you why this is nice. You see, just to make those changes, I had to do 4 separate operations. If I wanted to mute all the microphone tracks without a bus, I'd have to come through and choose mute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And that's going to be time consuming. What's nice is once I've routed these through a bus, I can mute the bus. And oops, did I not do everybody? Oh, I see. We're getting the soundboard here too. So muting the bus will mute all the tracks that are feeding into the bus before they go out to that final output mix. And that lets me just with one click mute them. I can also add effects to the bus that will be applied to all the audio that's coming in. So rather than putting a compressor or an EQ or noise reduction on every single track, and while Audition's effects are fairly lightweight if you're using third-party effects from like Isotope or Waves, putting an effect on every track can, depending on how much CPU and RAM you have, can start to degrade system performance. But if I just put it on one, if I was just to put, say, a denoise on the bus, now I'm only running one instance of the denoiser, but it's denoising all of the clips that are coming in to that bus. So I'm able to really maximize the efficiency of my processing chain, as well as have easy control. So, rather if I had put a denoise on every single track and I wanted to bring that noise reduction down a little bit or increase it, I'd have to go through every single track and do it one by one and try and get the settings right. But if it's on a bus, I can just do it once and kind of forget it. We can go into certainly more on buses. I highly recommend if you're a video learner, YouTube, Mike Russell's Music Radio Creative tutorials. I know he's got some great tutorials about busing and routing, as well as a lot of other things in Audition. So for a quick solution, you can always look there. But again, I'll share my information. You can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to help answer any questions about setting up some of these routing and configurations. Let me show you something else. So let me close Michael Jackson before I accidentally play it. And oops, cause all kinds of problems. So in this podcast, you can interview, or you can kind of see there's sections here where I'm speaking, there's a little bit here. Let me find a better recording too, something that's a little shorter maybe. Here we go. So let's say I have an interview. Maybe I did it on my phone. Maybe did it with a Zoom recorder. Maybe it was in a thing. And you've got just a long single recording. You can bring this into a new multi-track, cut it up, and then start shuffling things around, trying to find the most interesting bits. But generally, for a lot of us, we'll like to listen to it first, find the parts that we think are interesting, and then use those later. And sometimes that can be kind of difficult if you're jumping between this waveform multi-track workflow. What's really nice is to be able to come in and kind of pre-select those little bytes. So if I zoom in here, just by right-clicking and dragging in the ruler, I can kind of select on, I can say, you know what, this part I really want to bring in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit M and save that as a marker. And if I come to the markers panel, you can see it's saved over here. And if I hit M and then the / key, question mark / key on the keyboard, will automatically let me rename this. So I can rename this based on what that little sound bite is talking about. In this case, it's a great introduction. Maybe we listen to the next bit. Yeah, that's what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, hit my M key, and hit the that / key again. And this is going to be where we talk about growing up in Seattle. If I listen to this, no, I don't like that part. Then there was a car driving by. What about here? There we go. That's a good section here. So I'm going to hit M / and this is whatever we were talking about next. So I can keep little notes about these sections in this markers panel. But what's nice is if I come back and I double click any of these markers, it will select that region of that recording of that wave file and let me listen to just that. But better than that, if I was to create, if I was to want to bring these into a multi-track session, well, you can see once I switched from waveform, once I switch away from that waveform, I don't see those markers anymore, but that's okay. There's this little button right here that says show markers of all files. If I click that, now any of the files that I have open that have markers will show up. And now those markers now are available to be dragged in as individual clips, just the marker portion itself. So I can really quickly start laying these out, and maybe I wanted to talk about growing up in Seattle later, but I wanted to say whatever, this part right here, and we'll align these. And I can start to really work more quickly. I can get that initial review pass, take that time to mark up where those passages I want to use, and then bring them really quickly, already defined as clips. And it's non-destructive again. So I can always drag this out if I need more, if I wanted to get, something I said before that, or any of this stuff. I can still, it's still referencing the full file. It's just making it a lot easier to build those sound bites ahead of time and then lay them out on the timeline. Now let's say I've aligned these. These are perfect. I want this one right here. I want this to just crossfade a little bit. I'm going to overlap it, adjust that crossfade. This is great. I love how these three clips flow, but I don't want them at the beginning. Well, yeah, I could come and select them all, make sure I have them all selected, move them down, move them to other tracks. Or what if they weren't even on the same track? What if this one was down here because it's an interview and it's going back and forth? Well, trying to keep track of that later, if I get it laid out up front and then 2 hours later I come back and I want to move it over to 4 minutes, I have to remember where everything was. And if I move these down and I'm like, oops, I wanted to move this over too, things they're out of sync. They're not hitting the same timing that I initially edited that I liked so much. So we have something called track or clip groups, and clip groups work by selecting those clips and either hitting the shortcut Command G or just coming in here and choosing group clips. And once they're grouped, those clips act as a single unit. They'll trim, they'll fade if things are aligned. They'll move around. All I have to do is grab one and the rest will come with it. They remain locked in sync together. So if I've crafted that little bit of an interview, or I've crafted that perfect intro, then I can just group the clips and I don't have to think about it. I'm not merging them. I'm not making a bunch of new files that I have to keep track of. Group clips really just keep things synced and available and very visual. So they adopt their own colors. So if I had some other content, let me find some other clips to bring in here. That's fine. This clip is adopting whatever track, color the track is. These remain their clip group no matter where I move them. So for visualization purposes, it's really nice to be able to always say, oh, this little red blob is my intro. It's my sound bites that I'm going to use for that. And what's nice is I can add additional clips to that group. So certainly if I was to click these two, now I've got a group and a new clip selected. I can come in here and just say group clips, and we'll add that new clip to the group. Now, when I move them around, they're all together. But here's where it's something really nice. And this is like, if you can see, if I click back and forth between these two clips that are in the group, you can see there's a white outline around whatever one I click on last. And that means that's the selected clip in the group. And that lets me do things like right click and choose groups, remove that focus clip, that selected clip from the group. Now I can temporarily nudge it forward if my timing wasn't right, or I wanted to add a little bit. Maybe I wanted to get that just before there and add a little bit of color there. And now I can right click and add it back into the group. So I can select this again and add it back into the group just fine. I can also suspend a group. So if I need to make some changes, I can suspend the group, move these clips around, whoops, and then right click again and choose to unsuspend the group, uncheck that. And now they're a group again, everything moves around. So you're not locked in when you define a group, you're not locked in forever. You can still go and manipulate all the elements, all the clips that are part of that group, and still be able to return very quickly to the group itself. Now, I've been mentioning some of the keyboard shortcuts, and every command can or does have a keyboard shortcut. How the heck do you memorize them all? Well, you don't have to. So if you come under Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, you can bring up and view the keyboard shortcuts that we've defined by default for everybody. And not only look at the different keys in this kind of keyboard layout, which should match your keyboard. So if you're using a keyboard that's a different language or different layout, it should reflect pretty accurately what the keyboard is as the OS, as Mac OS or Windows sees it. And you can see each of the commands. So Q is move playhead to the endpoint. A is toggle playback, auto scroll, et cetera, But you can also search for commands. So, if I wanted to look up those group clip commands, I can just click in the search box and type group. And now any of the commands that come through and say, have something to do with grouping show up. And so I can see, oh, Command G is the shortcut for group clips. But what was the one for remove that selected clip? Well, there's not one by default for remove focus clip from group. What if that's something I want to do quite a bit? I might want to create a custom keyboard shortcut for it. The easiest way is once you find that command here in the menu is just grab drag the key that you want assigned to that command right onto the command. And now Z will be the shortcut key for that command. You can go the other way as well. You can grab a command and drag it onto the key you want, or you can click in the space next to it and type the command that you want to be assigned to that, and it'll tell you if that's already in use, and if that's already in use by another command. And this is nice.
Finish up, and then I've got some questions for you.
I was just say one more thing is when you're in this view, you can also see all the shift, command, control, all the alternate shortcuts just by holding that key down on your keyboard. It will light up and change the view of the shortcuts in that thing, and you can see and drag those commands for those Command Shift or Command F, Control A, whatever that you want to use for those different ones. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
What's the right time to be using mono versus stereo versus 5.1 tracks?
Good question. So your microphones are generally a mono input source, unless you have a really fancy stereo microphone or you've set up this nice, perfectly phase matched array in front of you of multiple microphones. Generally, a microphone is a single mono input source. So a mono source can be a mono clip, like this one, any of these right here. It could be a stereo clip, like this one here, where there's one side do a left and a right channel, but they're part of the same clip. And that's going to be more for music, is usually mixed in stereo. So if you're bringing in stock music or you're bringing in some musical elements, you probably want a stereo clip on a stereo track for that. 5.1 is probably less common for podcasting, although there are some immersive podcasts that are being mixed in 5.1 or other channel formats. But it's probably rare you're going to be dealing with 5.1 clips as part of your production. If you are, you can place them, you can create from our tracks panel, you can create stereo, mono and 5.1 audio tracks. Generally, you'll probably know if you're working in a 5.1 project up front, and you'll want to make sure that your mix channelization is set for 5.1. Otherwise, everything is going to be squished down to stereo or mono, regardless of what that initial content was. If you're working in 5.1, I'd love to talk to you. It's not something that we have a lot of people producing podcast content in, but if that's of interest, I'd be really curious to know what that workflow is and where that content's coming from. Otherwise, choosing to mix in these environments, it's really dependent on the content. So if let's say you're mixing in 5.1 or immersive, some sort of immersive layout situation where you've got sound coming from more than these one or two directions, then generally how that's done is those mono inputs, the microphone, somebody talking into a microphone, is either spread in if I was to make this into a new 5.1, let me just do that really quick while we're talking about it. Where's one of those recordings? There's one. And of course, it's not the right sample rate. So in this case, it's a monoclip, right? There's just one channel. If I was to just play it out of system, it would play out one speaker, or it would play the same out of all speakers. Audition has the ability to pan that signal either in the stereo space or in that 5.1 surround space. So in this case, because I created a 5.1 project, and this is a 5.1 track, I can now kind of move and position where I want that sound, which speakers I want that sound to be coming from. And this is largely going to be up to personal preference if you're building these 5.1s. If you're doing something that's akin to a surround mix for TV or for video, just turn this off one more time, then you're probably, dialogue generally is positioned to come out of that center speaker, and then everything else is mixed around that. Of course, you may have a situation, especially if you're mixing a podcast that has video attached to it, and there's 4 people sitting around a table, and maybe you want to be able to position each of those participants. Let me just copy some, copy some clips down here. So now we have 4 different tracks. Each one is going to be mixed a little different. So maybe I really want this person, this track 1, to be coming from, if they're on screen and they're coming from the far left side of the screen of the image, I might want them to come from over there. And this person's sort of more positioned, sort of just left of center. This person's just right of center. And this person's way off to the far right. You can lay that out, and as in a 5.1 environment, as those people are talking on screen, the sound will be appearing to come from those kind of different directions. It's not really the most common way. We don't really expect to hear, as we're watching something like that, expect to hear sound coming from, or voices coming from these different directions. We're usually used to having it come from center, but certainly, it's a creative decision that anybody's free to make. And it's probably a much longer discussion, but again, I'm happy to be reached out to and chat about this a little bit more in depth if it's something you're interested in.
So the next question is, what are the recommended levels for music, and how about for normal speaking portions? How low should music be if it's being used as background while a speaking portion is going on?
That's a great question. So, and that's open to, that's certainly open to interpretation as well, or destination based, because, if you're publishing something to say Spotify, their requirements for the loudness are different than Amazon, are different from Apple iTunes, are different from everywhere else. Generally, how that's the industry works now is around something called loudness. It's different from, if you watch some old YouTube videos or you read some old documents that say, oh, you got to run normalize everything to, -1 dB, blah, blah, blah. It's not really, that's not the best practice. Loudness is a way of measuring volume over time, and it's what prevents one podcast from sounding way louder than another on the same platform, or YouTube videos or commercials and television shows on TV, where if your loudness is wildly off, you can get massive fines from the FCC. In this case, if you're looking for target levels for mixing, so that your dialogue sits well above your music, there's things you can do to really facilitate that. So if you're not familiar with what we call the Essential Sound Panel, let me show you that really quick. The Essential Sound Panel works by tagging your clips as either dialogue, music, sound effects, or something else. And let me get rid of all the clips that aren't part of this, and we'll just bring these up really quick here. I realize we're running out of time. I was very talky, so I'll try and cover this really quick. So I have 2 clips here that are dialogue, back and forth interview, and I have this music clip. And I want to be able to make sure you can see that music clip looks a lot louder. It's probably going to stomp all over the dialogue and make it lost. So a very easy way to make this work is to select the 2 dialogue clips and just click over here in the Essential Sound Panel. Say these are dialogue. And on the music clip, do the same thing, but say this is music. Now, not only does this make it easy to quickly select all clips of a certain type, but now I can do actions on those dialogue clips without affecting the music clip. And these are dialogue set, specific settings and defaults for most of this stuff. So the first one we have is something called auto match loudness. And this targets broadcast standards for loudness. You can certainly make some adjustments out later if you like, but this is going to, you can see if I just click it once, it quickly looks at all the clips and adjusts them so that they're all the same relative loudness to each other. Likewise, we have the same option here for music, but we target a lower level so that if I've got 2 minutes to get this rendered out and up, or I'm fired and I just come in here and I say, these are dialogue auto match, this is music auto match. It's not going to win you in any awards. You're not going to go win an Emmy for sound design, but it's going to sound okay. And it's going to make sure that your dialogue sits on top of the music. But you can do a couple of other things here as well. So because I've tagged these as dialogue and this is music, I can say, you know what, I want you to bring the music down a little bit whenever there's voiceover or dialogue happening, and then bring it back up during silent passages. And there's a couple settings here. I can choose how quickly to respond, how much to duck it down. But this is, in the industry, this is called ducking, music ducking. And normally this would be a very manually intensive operation, drawing in key points and adjusting them. What the auto ducking feature in the Essential Sound panel does is kind of get all those points drawn for you. And then if you want to adjust them more, you can kind of come in here and do it yourself manually. Generally, what we're looking for when you're going to export, and let me do this. I'll go, let me make a mix down entire session. So when you're looking at this is our podcast. It's great. We seem to be hitting about -18, but then we peak up to, we spike up there. We have a panel called Match Loudness. And what this lets me do is it lets me drag one or more files into this panel. It shows me the loudness that it's set to, but it lets me change, lets me adjust it so that it matches the requirements for where I'm publishing to. So if I'm about to publish to Spotify, and if I look at Spotify's website, it tells me they want -14 LUFS for their podcast. LUFS is that loudness measurement acronym. So I can just kind of type in -14, click run. You can see it's changed. It's brought the volume up quite a bit, but it's also going to be legal. Spotify is going to love it. It's not going to make any additional changes. It's going to make sure, as long as I made sure that before I ran this, my dialogue and music sounded good at whatever level they were originally mixed at, it's going to make them sound just as good, but also be qualifying for the requirements for those destinations. I know that wasn't quite the right answer, or quite the answer you might have been looking for. But again, like so much of this, it's really open to interpretation. It's open to your style. So some podcasts may want the music right up there and the dialogue to be mixed in, or have that kind of morning zoo FM radio hot sound where the music cuts out really quick and comes back in as they're speaking. And you might have a more leisurely, relaxed Zen podcast where the music fades out slowly and it's never too loud and the dialogue comes in, and there's so many variations that it's tough to say, oh, this is exactly this, these are the settings you want for one or the other. But again, those can be customized and created into your sequence templates. So once you've just dialed it in, you don't have to think about it again.
Well, I think we have time for one final question. Are there any settings I should keep in mind when recording in Audition? My recordings tend to have super low audio levels to the point where I can barely hear anything, and I often end up recording in GarageBand and porting over to Audition afterwards.
So Audition doesn't change. It has no control over the input level coming in from your audio device, whether that's a USB microphone, whether that's a Rodecaster, whatever your audio interface is. Audition will just capture the input stream as it's given to us by the audio device. There are other applications that will add a boost to that, but it's just this, it's the same as turning up the volume after the fact. If there's, if it's a very low signal and there's background noise, it's going to turn up the background noise. And that's not really what you want. In this case, you want to make sure that your input levels are high are where they need to be before it comes into Audition. So on the Mac, that might be coming in here into the Apple's audio MIDI setup, the audio devices, and adjusting the input levels here and making sure that they're loud. If it's on a device where you have an input gain adjustment on either the microphone or the interface, that's generally where you want to be able to turn that level up. Because again, once it comes into Audition or GarageBand or Audacity, the signal's baked in at whatever level. So even turning it up is not necessarily going to result in better sound, because you're going to be turning up all the negatives like background noise. And when you have a low input signal, those are going to be more pronounced than they would if you had a rich high input signal. If you do have something it comes in and it's too quiet, and there's no way to recapture it, you can certainly just here on Audition on the clip, grab the little volume knobby here at the bottom left of a clip and turn it up or down, or use some of the effects like amplify or more or better a compressor. And that's a whole other class we can go into on compression, to turn that signal up and minimize the amount of low level background noise that might come in and interfere as well.
Fantastic. All right, we're coming to the end of our time here. So I just want to say thank you so much to Durin and to Adobe for putting this together for us. They were a sponsor of our Ambi's pre-show, and we are super appreciative. And we know many of our members use the software to actually record their podcast. I know you said you were willing to give out your information. So if you want to put any information in the chat box, now's a great time to do that.
So there's my email address. It's just my first name at adobe.com. Don't share it out with the world, but everybody else seems to have it, but based on the amount of unread messages in my inbox. So I will get back to you as soon as I can. But I'm happy to dive into more of this. And I really like learning more about what you're doing and how I can make these better, because Audition is such a gnarly, deep, rich application. And I never, for these kind of group events, I never really know how much experience and how much background people have going into it. So getting a better idea of what you're looking for helps me, help you guys, helps make better podcasts for everybody.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to everybody for coming. Just a reminder, we have upcoming events listed on the events page on podcastacademy.com, and we will see you hopefully on June 29th at the membership meeting. Everyone have a fantastic rest of your week and take care.